Welcome back to my channel. As you guys can tell by the title, I'm going to be speaking about how black women are hypersexualized, and I'm also going to be speaking from the lens of Misogynoir. I don't know if I'm saying it right. My first language is French, do not come for me. But I'm going to be talking about black women, their struggles, the history of how black women began to be hypersexualized. You guys also notice I don't have my mic today. The reason being, it's right here. I honestly could use it, but I don't know how charged it is, and I don't want to risk it dying in the middle of the video. I don't want to waste this video. It's a very important topic for me. It's a very important video for me today. I really want to speak about it, so let's get straight into it. So what is misogynoir? Essentially, it's a term that was coined by Bailey. So Moya Bailey in 2010, basically to describe the anti-black racist misogyny directed towards black women specifically. So it's towards black women that may be transgender, cisgender, and black women, and it impacts their lives. It impacts their social relationships. It impacts their everyday life. It impacts them through media. It impacts them in several different ways. So yeah, so certain experiences may be like over black women being fetishized, or black women being seen as trophies that need to be pleased, or being overly sexualized, being described as aggressive, not deemed feminine enough. Black women constantly have to fight to make definitions for themselves because everywhere they're put at the bottom of the scale. So I do want to talk about the European history of how black women, African women, began to be what's it called? They begin to be hypersexualized. I'm gonna look here because I took my notes. But essentially during the 17th century, Europeans traveled to different parts of Africa that did have some clad natives. So they looked around like the natives and the different tribes, and they were essentially seeing those dances, and they were labeling these dances as being overly sexual as dances that really reflected a lot of sexuality from African women. They also described it as being as Africans being expressing their sexuality and their lust. So obviously they saw these dances as through the ethnocentric lens. So essentially they looked at African polygamy, because African polygamy is widely normalized in Africa. If you guys don't know, in different parts of Africa, in different countries, it's widely normalized. So they just looked at African polygamy and African tribe dances, because in a lot of African tribe dances, women are usually half naked. Usually it would be like their top of their bodies are naked, and then the bottom of their bodies have like these dresses that are can be described as revealing. It's obviously tradition, it's tribes, it's the way they dress. So the tops are semi-naked and then the bottom are dressed. So they saw this as being provocative, and they saw it as being essentially provocative, fierce, warm, essentially. So that's how they described it, because they were looking at it from the lens of ethnocentrism. And it was seen as a sign of uncontrolled sexual lust, hypersexuality, all of these things. So William Bosman, which is the one, he owned slaves, etc., he essentially was describing these women as being fierce. He was describing these women as being exotic, much hotter than the men. And he was also describing the way they were dancing and the different dances as being striving for a lover. So essentially like provocative and trying to seductive essentially. So that's like kind of how it started with the hypersexualization of black women, especially African women. So essentially they had a stereotypical image of black people in general. So they saw black men as being dangerous potential rapists, and they saw black women as being whores. They saw them as being Jezebel whores. And that's the term I want to get into, Jezebel. So if you don't know what a Jezebel is essentially okay, before that, I do want to get into the fact that they did describe black people as being subhuman. What is subhuman? Basically deserving below human decency. So aggressive. They described them as having animal-like sexuality. They described them as being culture. I can't speak today. In terms of their cultures, it was very crazy, and then they described them as also being intellectually inferior. So that's the way they saw black people. That's the image that they saw of black people, but they especially had a very sexual image of black African women. So the term Jezebel was essentially started around the times of slavery. So these white men did prefer women who were called mulattoes. Mulattoes is essentially a woman who, not a woman, but like a person, an individual who has a black parent and a white parent. So they liked when these women who they called mulattoes had a black parent and a white parent. So nowadays we'd call them light skinned, or we'd call them mixed. And they also liked when these women had ethnocentric features. So features that were European like, so slim noses. Sorry guys, my video just stopped. But essentially, I was just explaining that they liked using these mulattoes as slaves. They liked these women to be used as slaves for these white men so they could reproduce. So essentially, the Jezebel stereotype was used essentially to describe the sexual relationships between a white man and a black woman. So it was especially used, like I said, for light-skinned women with white men, and it was essentially describing that relationship between the slave and the slave and the owner, the enslaved and the slaver. So that it was essentially the terms that were used to describe that relationship. So it essentially viewed black women under the lens of them being unsatisfied for sex. So they were essentially never satisfied. They had a really big appetite for sex. They were really aggressive. They were very rough, very fierce. So it basically painted that image of how black women were sexually. And essentially to describe that, they were essentially saying that black women were never satisfied with black men. So they used these black women as properties that they owned for white men. And obviously, since these black women were seen as being properties, they were slave, rape did not exist. So rape was not a thing. It was not possible to describe or consider it as being rape because they were owned. So it was just black women that were being used as concubines. They were being used as to reproduce. They were being used with these white men for these sexual favors and these sexual acts, but they basically had no liberty. They had no possession of their body. They were seen as animals, and that's the term Jezebel. That's the stereotype that is still used today to describe black women. All right. So the depiction of seeing black women as Jezebel was very common. So it began during slavery, like I said, around the 17th century, when these Europeans, they traveled to different parts of Africa and just saw these tribal dances and the African culture and these African dances and the way these women dressed up and the clothing. They saw everything under the lens of very sexual expression of sexuality and lust. So that's the lens they saw it through, and it continued to spread through the 1900s, and until today it's still used as a term to describe black women. It's also depicted in everyday items. So drinking glasses, postcards. It shows, like, I don't know if you guys have seen before, but it shows black women that are drawn with exaggerated features. So very big breasts, very big ass, very big noses, very big eyes, very big lips, with exaggerated makeup. And these black women are usually semi-naked, sometimes even fully naked. And essentially it's shaped and it's reflected by the white attitudes towards what black feminine sexuality is. And it's really hard for black women nowadays to feel safe or feel comfortable to express their femininity or to express their sexuality, because obviously, like, they've constantly been given and attributed these labels that suppress them, you know, and put them in that box of like, oh yeah, black women are usually super aggressive when it comes to sex, they're super hard to please, and all these labels that are crazy. But I want to show you guys some of the caricatures and some of the images. Let's hope YouTube doesn't just block everything, but I want to show you guys some of the caricatures and some of the images that were spread, that were used, that are still used today. I will be moving a little bit so I can show you guys everything. I will be clicking on these images. So this is one of them. What else? This one as well. You'll see it sometimes in statues and stuff. So you'll see a woman that's like half naked, top completely no clothes. You'll see things like, what else? Like this. You also see things like that. Just humiliating black women, stripping them of their privacy, essentially, putting them under a box of how they should look like. We also have this as well. Things like this. I think you guys have seen this in the media before. Also have, gotta zoom in on this one. Okay, so these are some of the images that in the caricatures that are used, that were used, that are still used in the media to describe black women, right? The stereotypical black women. That is Jezebel Stereotypes Gallery 1. There's also Gallery 2. This is an image from Gallery 2. This as well. And there are plenty more. There are plenty more. So there are even categories that have been created. I know that you guys just saw the images. You guys have, that I just showed you guys. You guys can kind of like picture and kind of like mentally place them into categories. You can see that some of these caricatures were essentially women that were seen under a lens of being very sexualized, so having handcuffs, being semi-naked, being very exposed, needing help, all of these things. So you guys can see that is a trend in some of the caricatures. Another trend in some of the caricatures, you can see these women are made to be ugly. So they're made to have big lips, big noses, big hoops, all of these things, and made to be very unattractive and unappealing. So that actually comes with my next point. Very interesting. So essentially, the Jezebel images defame African women that can be seen into two categories. So we have pathetic others and exotic others. And you guys can kind of guess based on what I just told you guys which one goes into pathetic others and which one goes into exotic others. So essentially, pathetic others essentially includes depictions of black women as being physically very unattractive, unintelligent, uncivilized. So you guys can see some of these images had like black women who had essentially like very exaggerated traits, with very big lips, very big noses, looking very unappealing. So these African women's features were essentially very distorted, and essentially that's just to kind of like portray like white man finding black women sexually unappealing. That's essentially what they're trying to portray here. And then you guys can kind of like imagine exotic others would be essentially like black women being exotic or looking different or being hypersexualized. So essentially, and there's one specific example that I want to show you guys from that website that I'm using. That's a website I used to do my research. I love it so much. It's really taught me a lot, but this is essentially the image. I'm going to show you guys. So this is the image. Okay. And as you guys can probably read the room, this falls into pathetic others. So we have that woman, right? And you can see that she is, one second, I want to read exactly what it said. So you can see her lips are exaggerated, her breasts sag, and she's essentially seen as very unattractive, very unappealing. Essentially, it's a perspective of what white men would find. So white men would find that black woman, that African woman, very unappealing to look at, to be with. So they essentially exaggerated her features, and she's essentially is trying to make her look too ugly or too stupid or sexually unattractive, essentially. So she would be like a source of laughter, essentially. Like that's the way depicts. These are the two categories that these caricatures fall into. So you either have these black African women who are seen or depicted as being so ugly and uncivilized and stupid and look dumb, and they're super unattractive for white men not to find them attractive or not to not want to be with them. And then you have the exotic others where these women are super sexualized, completely naked, sometimes semi-naked. They're very exotic, they're very different, they're very provocative, and this is what white men would love, or essentially they're excited to discover essentially what that would be. And honestly, that's something that black women still have to deal with till this day. And it's a very sad thing, because obviously now black women have to navigate their lives, have to navigate their different systems, their everything, that have to navigate media as well. And they have to really constantly ask themselves, like, is this genuine desire? Like, is this person trying to get to know me? Are they trying to get to know my mind, my boundaries, my hobbies, the things that I like? Or is it just fetish? Is it just a fetish? Are you just fetishizing me? You know? And essentially fetishizing would be reducing a woman to her fantasy, to her skin, to her race, you know, to her as a sexual partner rather than her as a lifetime partner or as a girlfriend or anything else. And it's really hard for black women out there, you know, to constantly have to wonder, wonder like whether they're an experiment or they're gonna be a partner. And it's so engraved, like it's so engraved, where they constantly have to try to depict whether they're going to they're whatever they're hearing or whatever they're navigating their lives, and they're asking themselves, is this a microaggression? Am I crazy? Am I doing too much? Am I being fetishized? Like, you know, they're navigating their lives not knowing how to, because everything might be a microaggression, everything might be something where they're being disrespected, like they just don't know. So obviously I just love making research on this because it really opened my eyes. It really opened my eyes. And you know, I also wanted to get into the fact that within the black community it happens a lot as well. You would be surprised. Obviously you would think, you know, it only happens from, you know, other communities or maybe from white people towards black people, but it also happens within the black community as well a lot. The categorization of black people, black women as well, like the whole thing of light skin, dark skin, and brown skin women. And obviously black people are now turning around and telling us that, hey, we shouldn't put ourselves into categories, hey, we shouldn't be doing that because we're all black. But it's a bit too late, because you know, a lot of colorist ideas are built within the fact that we see ourselves as black people, but not just black people being separate, distinct, rather than seeing ourselves as just one race, right? That are supposed to love and support each other. So obviously that's definitely really hard as well. And we need to understand that the struggles within black people is not the same as well. The struggles within light skinned women, for example, and then dark skinned women, we need to acknowledge that all black women suffer and nobody takes anything away from that. But we also need to understand that their struggles are not equal and they're not the same. And that's also unfortunate, you know. Obviously, navigating my life as a black woman has always been hard, but recognizing when there is microaggression and recognizing when there are things that I don't feel comfortable with is something as well that I'm learning to do and speak up against, you know. So yeah, black women have had to deal with that label of being Jezebel. I don't know if I'm saying that word right. Either way, I'm saying the way I see it, but um, yeah, as well. So that's what my video was about. It's a research that I definitely love. There's definitely a very wide perspective to this topic. I'm only hitting maybe a little bit of it, but it's definitely a video that I did want to make and did want to speak about. I'm trying to see if I didn't miss anything. But yeah, that will be a video. I might make a part 2 of this. If you have something to say, disagree with, agree with, you can leave in the comments. I do have time in my day. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys like this video, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.